Mexican War. Jefferson Davis had been a distinguished Secretary of War. Lincoln had no such credentials or background.
Early in the war, Lincoln realizes he lacks knowledge in military strategy. So he turns to the same place he learned to practice law, the pages of books.
He went to the Library of Congress and ordered books. He read them, and suddenly he knew as much about war strategy as anybody who had gone to West Point.
Having done his homework, Lincoln is eager to put his knowledge to use. So he writes his generals outlining his thoughts. While the North has superior numbers, a larger army and navy, the South has interior lines, road and rails to quickly transport their troops and outmaneuver the Union. Lincoln weighs these strengths and then suggests a course of action.
We must fail unless we can find some way to making our advantage an overmatch for his. This can only be done by menacing him with superior forces at different points at the same time.
By attacking from both the east and west, Lincoln can prevent the Confederates from simply shifting their forces. However sound his strategy, Lincoln struggles to convince his generals.
Lincoln finally found some generals who would actually do it. And when Grant and Sherman and Sheridan and Thomas then start putting the pressure on all fronts, Lincoln says, well, finally, that advice that I've been trying to get my generals to adopt for the past 2.5 years is being taken.
By 1864, the country is soaked in the blood of its soldiers, blue and gray. By war's end, nearly 620,000 men are dead. After years of fighting, Lincoln is under incredible pressure to justify the terrible sacrifice and bloodshed. On one side, he has abolitionists clamoring to give the war a moral purpose. But Lincoln worries what freeing the slaves might do to his army. His generals advise against it.
General McClellan is telling Lincoln in no uncertain terms that white men will not fight to free black men, that if you turn this into a war about the Negro slave, then Northern armies will dissolve overnight.
Lincoln faces a dilemma. He needs the manpower black soldiers can provide, but risks losing the white soldiers if he frees the slaves. So he's careful not to reveal his intentions.
While he's publicly denying that he has any intention of moving on emancipation, privately he in fact is writing a draft of the Emancipation Proclamation.
Lincoln waits for a Union victory before proceeding. And when he finally makes the announcement, he emphasizes the practical benefits. The proclamation only frees slaves in Confederate states. It reduces the Southern workforce and adds 200,000 black recruits to Union ranks. At the same time, Lincoln begins to cast the bloodshed in a new light.
He persuaded people that there was a secondary cause to the war, that union meant liberty, that liberty would preserve the Union. It was intertwined.
Every man has a right to be equal with every other man. In this great struggle, this form of government and every form of human right is endangered if our enemies succeed.
Overnight, Lincoln redefined the war. No longer is it a war about states' rights. It becomes a war for human rights.
Lincoln's shrewd mind infuses the war with a new purpose. As the fighting intensifies, he continues to be a hands-on commander-in-chief. But Lincoln's lack of experience occasionally shows through. And when the fighting reaches Washington's borders, he makes a critical blunder. July 11, 1864. A Confederate raiding party sneaks to the outskirts of Washington. At Fort Stevens, they engage Union forces. With General Grant occupied to the south, Lincoln decides he'll supervise the action himself. Flushed with confidence, he walks right into the line of fire.
Lincoln wanted to go out and see the fighting. And so he did. He went out and stood on the parapet and observed the Confederate forces coming and the Union resisting them.
Lincoln is so fascinated by the battle, he ignores the danger. Up on the parapet, he's exposed to Confederate sharpshooters.
By that time, everybody knew who Abraham Lincoln was and what he looked like, and he was the tallest target in the United States.
Despite the mounting casualties, Lincoln continues to stand his ground.
The staff officer for the 6th Army Corps yells at Lincoln, "Get down, you fool! You're going to get shot."
Lincoln retreats to safety, miraculously unharmed. Although many question his judgment, no one questions his bravery. The next day, he returns to boost morale.
Gentlemen, I want to thank you for your service.
Lincoln showed some physical courage in his willingness to go out and also some curiosity about how the war was going. And he felt great empathy for the troops and wanted to show his solidarity with them.
His involvement with the troops pays off politically. By 1864, the country is war-weary, and Lincoln's re-election prospects look bleak. He squares off against George McClellan, the Army's former general. Surprisingly, the soldiers' vote goes overwhelmingly to Lincoln.
And soldiers appreciated that he cared about them, that he sympathized with them, that he was in their corner. And they would say when something went wrong, once Father Abraham finds out about this, it'll be fixed.
Lincoln lives up to his fatherly image. He identifies with the troops because he shares a humble background with them. And this makes their deaths all the more painful. In turn, soldiers understand that he shares in their suffering. It even seems to take a physical toll. In just a few months, he loses weight dramatically.
He looked like someone who had internalized all the carnage and suffering of the war inside himself. He looked like death warmed over.
Whichever way it ends, I have the impression that I shall not last long after it is over. The springs of life are wearing away.
Lincoln senses that he has little time left, and in his last few months, uses his persuasive powers to their full extent. He knows that the Emancipation Proclamation could be overturned, so he permanently bans slavery with a constitutional amendment.
By one means and another, people who had previously opposed the 13th Amendment decided to stand back or to vote in favor of it, and the man operating the controls behind the curtain was that rough, intelligent farmer, Abraham Lincoln.
But Lincoln's days are numbered. On April 14, 1865, an assassin ends his life. After his death, the image Lincoln helped create rises to take his place.
Well, the rail splitter Lincoln is much closer to our idea of rough-hewn, muscular, frontier democracy. It's a very appealing image. It brings him closer to us.
But the real Lincoln remains elusive, for he's shrewder, craftier, more manipulative than the myths portray. With an invisible hand, he bent men to his will, and did it so well that only now are we coming to understand his methods. For Lincoln's greatest trick was hiding his talents, disguising himself as a simple, unassuming man from the plains.
Lincoln knew how to use both the intelligence and the conclusions people were coming to when they met him. He knew that they were underestimating him, and he let them.